I'm currently in New York City for work. I have been craving a difficult read ever since finishing Moby Dick, and there was one that was really talking to me or calling me, and so I went on a hunt across the city today to try to find it. And I did. Behold, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Also, I'm using my front camera right here, so this may be flipped around, but hopefully I can figure out a way to reverse this and it'll look good. So yeah, I'm going to try to record some footage of me actually reading this book. I know this is a book that's known for like extreme footnotes, to the degree that its footnotes apparently have footnotes, but I really don't know much more than that. I know it deals with addiction. I know it deals at least partially in a tennis camp, and I don't think it's a linear timeline. That's about all I know going into this. But I'm extremely excited to read what the internet deems as one of the hardest books to read. So let's just get to it. Alright, so I just got finished reading about 30 pages of Infinite Jest, and wow, it's definitely not what I expected. We've been introduced to two separate POVs, it seems like. One in Hal, who we've now followed for 2 chapters somewhat. It's, like I said, a non-linear timeline, so I can't really tell where the events of things fall, besides for the fact that there is age reference, so I know that the 3rd chapter, or I don't really know if they're considered chapters, but there's change in dates. So the 3rd change in date occurs when when Hal is much younger, whereas the first one occurs while he's like in a college entrance exam of some sort. And it seems like Hal has some sort of speech problem. It's difficult to tell exactly what's going on, but he seems like some form of unreliable narrator. And yeah, it's very, very captivating so far. We also have this other character, I think his name is Erdedi. I don't know if that's the right name or not, but he referred to himself that way at one point. We only followed him for a couple of pages, but he essentially just like had this really weird way of wanting to quit an addiction, which was actually very kind of enjoyable to read, which is very like unique in its way it was written, I'd say. I just never would have thought of that situation or that way of solving the problem in the way that he does approach it. And it's like clearly an addict's way of thinking through the situation, but it's very clever. I'd say it's very witty so far. I'm also very surprised by how easy this book flows. I have been reading for about an hour and a half or so, and I've only gone through 30 pages, so I'm not reading it fast by any means. So I think maybe it is demanding a bit more attention than I'm not realizing, but the book itself is not difficult to read, at least not yet. I've only experienced one footnote thus far, and it was a pretty simple one that I actually knew the meaning of before I even flipped back. But yeah, so far it seems pretty easy. The book is surprising me in a lot of ways. I've been completely glued to the page thus far. It's really enjoyable. I don't really understand what's happening, but I think that's okay. I'm also a bit confused about the years, I think it is, that they show at the start of the chapters. It seems like they're like have random names to them, and I don't really know like where they fall in relation to one another, so that's making the timeline a little bit confusing in itself. But I'm pretty certain that some things are just meant to be confusing, and I'm okay with that. So we're just gonna keep pushing on with the book. You probably won't hear from me again until maybe tomorrow night. I would bet that I'll probably read this book some more. I may read it tomorrow on my lunch break and some stuff like that. So there's a decent chance that it's a bigger update whenever we come back next time. Bye-bye.
The next day.
Alright, so it's the next day. I'm about to go out for some dinner, but I figured that I might as well take the book along with me and read a bit. So I guess maybe you'll see some scenes from there. Depends on how nervous I get whenever I'm recording. I'm going to try to get some shots of the food and me reading. So I should also note that I'm normally a pretty big homebody, so I probably won't normally be recording out in public, but since I'm here and I just want to get out of the room a little bit, I figured might as well go and just, there's a little food hall near me, and sit there and eat, maybe get a drink and read some of the book. So yeah, I'll probably end up recording an update when I get back, but depending on what time I get back and such, this may be one of the last updates you see from me here, because I'm only here a couple more days, and while I'm here I have some work stuff I have to do and stuff like that for the next couple of days, so I may be a little bit more busy, but we'll see if I can squeeze another update in. So to the restaurant. Alright, so it is the next day. I actually didn't end up recording an update yesterday after I got back from dinner, but I'm recording one now. And yes, I did take the dust jacket off the book to take it out in public. I'm not too familiar with the history behind this book, but I think that it may have some controversial connotations to certain people, so I was hesitant to be seen reading this mammoth of a book. Maybe that's just me being self-conscious, but either way, it just seemed nicer to take this off, and then you couldn't really tell what book it was, just a big book. So currently I am on page 64, but I'm actually not, because I don't know if you can see there. Let's see. Maybe that'll give you a hint as to what I mean by I'm actually not. But I do have 2 bookmarks in this book at this point now, because we have gotten to the point where we're hitting a lot of endnotes. But I just hit James Incandes's filmography and all the different films that he shot, and I'm like 2 pages in right now, and this is the first part of the book that's felt arduous to read. There are some interesting things in there though, like I've noticed that there is this copy of this film called Infinite Jest, and we have at least 1 and 2. I've seen both those versions in there, and yeah, that's about it. I think I have a couple more pages in that. I'm not necessarily looking forward to reading that, but I'm going to. We're going to push through. We're going to keep moving on. It hasn't been terrible to read that. Another encyclopedic novel that I've read in this sense is Moby Dick, and I'm probably going to end up comparing this book to Moby Dick a lot. And obviously there's a big time jump in between those 2 books, right? So it's probably even safe to assume that you wouldn't have a book like this without Moby Dick's forthcoming, so in no way disparaging to that. And it also is just different English in general, but this has felt much easier for me to read than that book, and just more enjoyable. I think I care, for some reason I think I've realized I care more about substance abuse and tennis academies than I do whaling. Like, whaling is cool, don't get me wrong, it was cool to learn about that, and I enjoyed parts of that book, but parts of that book just felt so arduous. And even in this filmography note that I'm in right now, it doesn't feel near as arduous as some of those cetology chapters I had to experience in Moby Dick. So I think I'm fine. I think we're just going to keep pushing through. I really don't think it'll be a problem. I'm still a little confused on the timeline of everything. I think that's kind of the point, like I said. I also am just confused in general as to some of the different POVs and how they fit in. We also have this other character who is watching a film, it seems, and is just stuck watching it. And I kind of picked up, I've been watching and listening to stuff about Infinite Jest, and I think I understand what's happening there a little bit, because I did hear that there's this film that is addictive, and it's the idea is it's supposed to deal with themes of addiction and how entertainment plays a role in our society, from what I understand. That's just what I heard, so I think that's kind of playing into that. But there's some characters that I really want to return to, like Erdedi in the 2nd chapter somewhere. I haven't seen him again, but I'd really like to hear more from him. I'm really enjoying this book, surprisingly a lot more than I thought I would thus far. Now, this may change at some point, that's very well could happen, but 64 pages in, and the book has been very enjoyable to read. The chapters themselves are very easy to understand what's happening generally. There's some difficult words here and there, I'm having to Google words and stuff, but it's not anything crazy, and it's not the sentences are crazy to the point where I'm I don't understand what you're saying. Some of them can be like that a little bit, but I would say overall it hasn't been too difficult. I was definitely expecting a much more hard read, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I actually am. I think David Foster Wallace's writing thus far has been phenomenal. It's been very digestible thus far, is basically what I'm trying to say, and I think if you want to read this book, you should. I don't think it's a crazy book that's incredibly difficult to read. It's more so the length that I think will get most people, and I don't know, maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll see in 200 pages, 300 pages, maybe I'm not feeling the same way and I'm ready to put this book down. But I'm gonna go read about James Incandes's filmography now, so I'll see you guys later.
Where to?
Home. I'm going home.
Woman! I don't know where the f you live.
Alright, I am back. I'm on page 1 37. Hopefully you can see that. So I've made it a decent ways from travel and stuff like that. I got to read a decent bit on the plane, so I got to really go through a lot more of the book. And there was a couple things that I wanted to note. One, it's crazy that this book was written in the 90s. It feels so much like it's very predictive of a lot of technologies that I feel like we use today. Maybe not exactly, but very similarly. Even just like with the tapes and how those work and stuff like that. It's incredibly, it feels very much of this time as opposed to as written in the 90s, which I think is very interesting how much forethought Wallace would have put into writing this book. It also feels incredibly human and painful, but also humorous. I think that he does a good job of like making things feel very real, but not making it overly depressing on the reader. I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like a lot of the dark moments that I've read thus far have been very much so relieved by humor in the book. And I appreciate that as a reader. This book also feels oddly nostalgic to me in a way. I guess that goes back to what I was saying about how it definitely doesn't feel like it was written in the 90s and feels like it's set more in modern times, which I think in theory it is, but it's just crazy how predictive he was of modern times. But I think it's felt nostalgic for me because there's been some moments that have resonated with me and how I would have felt in my youth, and he puts them into words very well. In fact, the last chapter I actually read was, I want to say it was like a Sound and the Fury William Faulkner inspired chapter, in the sense that it was like a lot of misspellings, weird punctuation, like just missing punctuation in general. I would say I was expecting it when I first read it for it to be difficult to understand, but I mean I read like 5 pages of it and I feel like I got the gist of what he was trying to say in that chapter and what the character was going through. Now that chapter in itself was actually pretty dark, to be honest, one of the darker chapters that we've experienced so far, but nonetheless, it was readable. I understood what was going on. We've also been somewhat exposed to kind of how the tension is playing out between Quebec and North America, or Canada and North America. I'm not really sure if it's Canada itself or Quebec, and in the form of the 2 agents that we had having a conversation in the desert. And that was interesting. I still don't entirely understand how that dynamic works, what each entity really wants, but I think that that's something I'll figure out with time. I think the most overwhelming portion of this book thus far has been the sheer number of point of views and like different things that I don't know how they're actually going to tie into the story, but I think that's kind of the point, because we've spent multiple like single chapters with people that I don't know how they fit into the story yet, but I'm sure they will in some ways. There's probably, I think a lot of this is intentional, or at least I'm hoping it is. But if you examine each chapter, I feel like if you just take any little chapter or any point of view, it's very easy to understand what he's trying to say. I think at least for me, the gist of the difficulty of this book thus far has not been understanding what he's trying to say in certain chapters. It is understanding how the plot is going and where everything fits into the plot timeline or chronologically, which in itself I think is something you can piece back together later on. I've also heard that the footnotes can be rather intimidating, but really even like the long footnote, like I mentioned last time with the filmography, has been generally pretty easy to read. Like the filmography I won't say was the most enjoyable read. I've definitely read things that have been much more enthralling, but it wasn't difficult to read, and I felt like it did add some stuff to what I understood about this book. Like it told me about that his father had written Infinite Jest. I also am piecing together, I think, that the agents were talking about his father loosely when they're talking about Infinite Jest, because Infinite Jest is this film, I believe, that is addictive. It's the film that the Arab expat watched and got addicted, as well as everyone that came and to his house. I think it was like 20 something people they said before they stopped sending people. But yeah, and then we have these agencies investigating this is generally what I know so far. Like I said, I could be completely off base because this plot is still very much up in the air, but I'm just going to keep reading. I think that was all I really wanted to say. Hey guys, how's it going? It's been a couple days, I won't lie. I have been slowly picking away at the book, but I just haven't had a chance to record this update. Let's see, I'm on page 283, so I've made it a decent ways. I have been finding myself a little bit tired some nights to actually pick up the book, so I haven't made as much progress as I would like to. Not necessarily because the book itself is tiring, which it is a little bit more difficult to just pick up and read than some of the other books, but I've just been tired from work, mentally fatigued, I guess. I just want to pick up something a little bit more pulpy to read before bed. And some nights I've been working this in, but some nights it's just been something that's a lot simpler, which I think is completely fine. I'm really trying to take my time with this and get the most out of it that I can, because it's a book that there's a lot to get out of. There's just a lot going on. But I think I'm starting to piece things together a little bit, which is exciting. Also, I think going forward, and I may have already done this in previous updates, but I'm going to discuss some spoilers, some light spoilers here and there. So if you want to skip them, feel free to. But if you want to hear my thoughts on what's kind of happened so far in this last I think it's been about 150 pages or so. Stay tuned. So a big thing that's happened is it seemed like we're kind of establishing the POVs that we're going to be following. We probably will be jumping to some other intermediate POVs here and there like we have in the past with some characters that seem to like come up in little Easter eggs or in other character stories. Like for instance, Erdeti that I mentioned a bunch, he was now mentioned at the Infield halfway house. I think it's Infield. I'm pretty sure it's Infield, but he's mentioned at the halfway house of the story. And we've like seen him around there briefly, so he's kind of back in. He gets like a little cameo in other characters' point of views, which I think that's kind of cool. And it seems like he's kind of mixing these point of views in, so you see how these other characters end up in these other character stories, but it's all like in weird orders, and you kind of got to piece things together. And I'm sure I'm missing things, but either way, it's really that whenever I do pick those things up, I find them very like rewarding in a way. But yeah, we've had some newly established POVs. So the main one I think is Gately, who's like a recovering addict / worker at. I think he's either a worker. I think he's a worker. I don't think he's a volunteer, but it doesn't really matter. He's a worker / volunteer at the halfway house that he went through for his recovery. So far, we've only really had one chapter with him, but he had this chapter where he's kind of talking about this other guy that just came into the halfway house who's like this really smart dude or whatever, like a professor of something at some local community college, and the dude is just going on and on with all these big words and finding all these holes in the AA process and stuff like that. And Gately's just like, yeah, he's just trying to fool himself. Like he can see through it so easily, and just like, yeah, I mean, he's just trying to fool himself, and he's in denial. And then like later on, that character tries to pick fights with people and annoy people so that like he can get thrown out of the halfway house, and just use that as a coping mechanism to say that like, oh, the halfway house failed him as opposed to he failed his recovery. And it's funny because like this dude comes off so smart in a way, but he's just clearly so ignorant of his actual situation to where like Gately, it's just so obvious to him because he's probably dealt with similar things. I think this book has been very enlightening to like a lot of different stages and POVs of substance abuse thus far. We also have the new character point of view with Madam Psychosis, who is super interesting. She like wears a veil, and I'm really not sure why yet, but she just wears a veil around, and then she tried to like OD and herself in this one bathroom, which was an intense scene. And then there's a scene where she actually goes in the air, which is like where you first meet her, because she actually hosts this like radio talk show at midnight, or like it's late in the night, and she just talks and says random words. Like that chapter where you're getting the POV of the dude actually who's running the radio show, and he's talking about walking through this building that's shaped like a brain, and he's going to the roof and he's just sitting there and listening to music, or listening to the radio with like a headset on. It was just so incredibly vivid. I was not expecting David Foster Wallace to have such vivid writing. Like there's been a couple scenes like that in these last 150 pages that, and I'll talk about them, but there's been a couple scenes that they've just been built up in my head to where like I can still picture them right now. So like it feels like I'm there almost, which is incredible. I wasn't really expecting that out of this book, but I think that that's something that I haven't heard people mention, is how good he is at actually like describing a very unique place and putting you there. It's almost like fantasy-esque in a lot of ways, but like it's just rooted in kind of real world. I would say a little absurdist kind of real world, but it is somewhat inspired by the real world, or it is the real world essentially. We also know that Madam Psychosis has some type of relationship with James Incandescent, and then I think she was like lovers with Oren as well, but it's kind of still shrouded in mystique a little bit. Also, if you see me looking down here, it's just because I have a little board that I've been writing things down on whenever I've been reading the book to kind of remind me to say and bring up whenever I record these updates. So if I'm looking down there, it's because I'm reading off of that. Another incredibly vivid scene that I was completely not prepared for was the scene where we talk about how finding James is after his demise, as well, I'll say, because I want this video to get pushed by YouTube. incredibly disturbing. A picture that I have never thought about before and now have imprinted in my head and will forever. It was also like really surprisingly human. It was very absurdist in a way, but we also like, at least I could feel from reading it how much it impacted Hal and how much like he internalized that in a way. It was a really heavy thing for him to deal with. Even though he doesn't say a ton about it, you can tell it really impacted him a lot. And I thought that was like, it was written very well to describe that situation, in the sense that like how a teenager would probably deal with and talk to his brother about that. And it made me feel a lot. That was one of the scenes that I would say was one of the highlights that really sticks out in my head, was that entire conversation between Oren and Hal was like probably one of my favorite chapters thus far, where they're just talking about things, or it's also called him because he's being followed by wheelchair people who I'm pretty sure is the same people that Steepley is with, like the wheelchair assassins from Quebec. My theory so far is that they are following him because they want to get the tape, or they think that he knows something about James's tape, which was Infinite Jest, or what they refer to as the entertainment. I think that's what I picked up on so far. And I think they're following him, and like they even talked about interviewing him at some point, which like he was talking to Hal about in that same chapter. And it seems like they're just trying to get information out of him, so one, they can find out about like the entertainment, which I believe is the film that Arab expat watched previously. And they also were, I completely glossed over this last time, but in that same chapter they were talking about like Steepley, and I forgot the other guy's name, but when they were in the desert there, they were talking about also a antidote, quote unquote, tape that would like reverse that out of someone. We also know that I'm pretty sure it mentioned that Madame Psychosis was in that tape, so she may know something about it too. So I'm also interested to get more of her point of view for that reason as well. The third really big vivid scene I would say that stuck out for me though was the tennis tournament they had against the other tennis school, where they were in like this underground lung that was surrounded in glass, like really thick glass. They talk about how you can't hear sound through it very well, which by the way, I've never heard of a tennis lung before this book, but it just makes sense in my mind. I haven't even looked at a picture of one, but I have an idea of what it would look like. I need to look at one and see actually what it looks like. But that scene was just so vivid. You have so much going on. There's like, I think there was like multiple different games going on. We find out that John Wayne is just an absolute beast. He also had like his citizenship revoked because he came from Quebec to come to Infield's tennis academy, which I think is kind of showing a little bit more about like the geopolitics that are going on there between Quebec and Onan, I believe it's called Onan. Also, John Wayne was also mentioned in James's filmography. There's just so many people that kind of blend into that filmography, even though that chapter seems so arduous and so useless. It's been talked about a decent bit throughout this, because like John Wayne was brought up because I think James shot a film that was literally just a bunch of people with the name John Wayne who weren't like the famous Western John Wayne, and he was trying to make a point out of that, and John Wayne was cast in it. That was a lot of John Waynes, I'm sorry. We also find out that Hal is their number 2 singles tennis player for, I think it's 18, and he just like increased incredibly fast to reach that position, which I don't entirely know why. Maybe they'll explain that, or maybe he just practiced a ton, because Hal, well, all of them really are just like, it's basically like almost like slave labor for tennis. They're just like non-stop playing tennis. They have like no free time, and when they do have free time, they're just doing drugs, is what it seems like so far. Speaking of drugs, during that tennis scene, we also have Pemulus throwing up in a Pemulus, that's how I'm gonna say it. I think that's how you say it. He's like throwing up in a trash can, and I found this scene so funny because he's with Shat, I think. Please still promote this video, YouTube. But I think his name is Shat. And he's with Shat, and he's throwing up in this trash can. He's like, I didn't use any drugs last night. I made sure to go to bed at a good time. Like, why is it before games I always get these nerves and always get super sick? And Shat doesn't say anything, but he's like, you know, Pemulus, maybe you're actually just withdrawing, and that's why you're getting so sick. Maybe you'd be better off if you just did take drugs last night, because apparently they're just so addicted. He's so addicted to like drines, or dexedrine, I think is what it's talking about. And we also have this whole thing going on with Pemulus, who he got this like absurd chemical called like DMZ or whatever, which I think is, I'm just guessing, is somewhat in reference to like DMT or some relation to it, and I have no idea what's gonna go on with that. But Hal has already said he's gonna take it, and I think Pemulus wants to take it. I feel like that whenever we get into that and they actually start taking that, it's just gonna be a complete brain melting experience reading that. I feel like it's just gonna be a crazy stream of consciousness, but we'll see. I'm very actually kind of like, I'm excited to see what happens with that, but I'm nervous to read the chapters that come out of that, because I feel like they're just gonna be incredibly difficult to read. But we'll see, I guess. I feel like I'm just ranting at the camera, but this book has been absolutely phenomenal, if you can't tell from how passionate I'm talking about these things. There's been so many very unique experiences that have been imprinted in my brain. I think I touched on a couple of them, so I think I'm just gonna leave it there. That was a longer update, but I haven't done an update in a little bit, so I guess it makes sense that I did that. I don't know when I'll next record an update, but let's go read some more of the book now. Also, I just remembered while reading that scene where James, I believe it is playing tennis and then goes to slide on his knees and ends up ending his tennis career from what is such a graphic and terrible scene, if you know what I'm talking about. That was traumatizing as well, and it still makes my skin crawl. Ugh. Hello there. It has been some time. It's been a couple weeks. I haven't been the best about recording these updates, but I'm gonna try to do a decently big one now. I have been continuing to read the book. Currently I am on about page, let's check, 620 it seems. So I guess I'm close to like maybe roughly 2/3 of the way through the book. I should have recorded an update sooner, but I just had a busy last couple of weeks with work and everything. So I apologize for that. We're going to try to cover as much as we can right now and just make up for some lost time, I guess, or some missed ground. I've been noting things down on my board. This is going to be by no means completely extensive of everything that has happened since the last update, but it's just the things that I thought were interesting and things I wanted to mention to you and talk about. So I will say that also before we get into it, this book is the longest time I've spent reading any book. I've read books, I don't know if you can see them, but I've read like The Stand, 11, 22, 63, these big books, and I've just absolutely flown through them. But I haven't been able to do that with this book. I've been reading other things in between here and there too, so maybe that's part of it. But it's not because I don't enjoy the book, because I really do. It just feels like it demands me to slow down in some ways that a lot of these other big books I've read haven't necessarily. It's not a book where I feel like it doesn't do it justice to just rush through it. So I've really been trying to take my time with things and understand what he's trying to say. And I think that has led this to be a much longer experience. Because I think I've been reading this book for 3 weeks, a month or so. And like I said, I'm only about 2/3 of the way through. But I'm going to try to have a good little push and finish it up here soon, because this is going to be my next video on the channel. So I'm not going to upload anything until I finish this guy up. So yeah, so we're going to try to push through that, but let's get into what has happened since the last update. So the first thing I wrote on the board was that I was kind of establishing the factors or like the factions at play in regards to the North American conflict. We have like Onan, which is made up of Canada, the US, and Mexico, and then we have this anti-Onan establishment in Quebec, or the Quebecois, that want to actually secede from Canada. They're anti-Onan, but they're also anti-Canadian. They don't want to be in either of them, from what I understand. And that's where our wheelchair assassins come in, the AFR. The Quebecois start attacking the US, and they're trying to stage like terroristic attacks on the US as coming from Canada, to use with Canada as bargaining power to secede, because Canada is not currently letting them secede from Canada. So they're trying to use these terrorist attacks as bargaining power, like I said, and basically force Canada to allow them to secede, which is just a really interesting geopolitical conflict. There's actually a decent bit of geopolitical conflict in this book, even though it takes place primarily in North America. There's some other examples of that as well we'll talk about in just a bit, but I think I'm finally kind of understanding the different factions there and how they play, like with Steeply and Mareth. Those make more sense, or Mareth, I don't really know how you say his name, but they make more sense as to who kind of they are and where they fit into the whole system, I'd say. One of the ways they did those attacks was they would put mirrors in the middle of highways in like North Dakota and cause people to freak out and drive off the road because they thought there was a car coming at them, and that is just so insane. It's so diabolical. That's actually what I wrote. Mirrors on highways equals diabolical, because it just really is. And they said that the lady who actually figured out, or like the way their scheme got found out, was that a lady on Xanax, I believe it was, just drove through the mirror because she just didn't care, and they ended up finding out it was a mirror, which is just in itself just so clever. Like there's just so many unique ideas, I would say, in this book, or unique situations that are very absurdist, but they're also just like, they're thought-provoking in ways, they're human, it just lends itself to a very interesting read. I think that's part of the reason why this book is so well received by the people who do read it. We also obviously have the convexity or the concavity, depending on which side of the border you're on, and that seemed to be a big point of contention for the reconfiguration. And yeah, that's starting to make a bit more sense to me now. It seems like the US essentially had this part that was just filled with waste. I think that they were dumping their waste into it, and they basically pawned that land off to Canada, or to Quebec mostly, specifically. That's one of the big reasons why Quebec wants to leave Canada. They pawned that land off so it wasn't part of the US, and then now on the US side, it's technically like a convexity, whereas on the Canadian side, it would be a concavity. Did I get that right? Concave? I think so. Tell me if I got that right. Hopefully I did. That was all from off the top of my head. I could be completely wrong. And then we also had, like, going back to geopolitical conflicts, the funniest and most unique, what's the word, like adaptation almost, or like representation of geopolitical conflicts was definitely in the eschaton chapter, where we have all the players at Infield Tennis Academy playing this game, and they're like different geopolitical entities, and there's like war and conflict and diplomacy going on. It's all being calculated live on this computer that can apparently just do these complex calculations, and things just go to pure chaos. That was really one of the most interesting chapters for me to read. I think that chapter was like 20 pages, and I just burned through it because it was like just such a unique and interesting idea to equate those two things, or to find the similarity, to actually be able to write those things as it was written. That hands down was such a genius chapter, and maybe been actually one of the most clever chapters I've read in literature in general, I would say. We also have on the halfway house side, we have some of our characters finally converging. At least we did at the time of this. They've kind of come to terms with the fact that a lot of our characters have converged at the halfway house. We have Erdeti, who I mentioned a couple times because I wanted to read more from him. He is in the halfway house. We have obviously Gately, who seems to be our main point of view in the halfway house. And then we have Psychosis, Madam Psychosis. What's her name? Joella. That's right, Joella Van Dam or Van Dyne, I believe. We have all of them converging in our halfway house. They go to AA. Like one of the first couple chapters, we actually go to the AA. There is some graphic stories in those AA meetings. Oh my gosh! Like there's the story with our adopted sister of a handicapped girl who's like has things happen with their father, and that story was just so much to read. And there's also the story of like a heroin addicted lady having like a stillbirth, and there was just some very, very dark stories that just kind of hit me in the face when it came to those chapters, because they would just be like complete comedy sometimes, and just complete like, it just felt very lighthearted at times. And then I would read something like that, and it would just be so difficult to read. I do think that, I mean, it makes sense in that atmosphere that those people would be telling stories like that. And honestly, I didn't even think about them until reading that on this board, and now I'm having them go back through my head, which I don't even know how to fully express how I felt about that. I'm just going to move on. Like I said, they were pretty dark topics. If you want to know more, read the book. On a lighter note, I mean, somewhat lighter. It's really not that much lighter, but it's a little bit more satirical, I would say. The character of Eric Clipperton was very funny to me until it wasn't. I'll say that much. But Clipperton was like this tennis player that I don't entirely remember off the top of my head now how he actually got to this point, but he essentially would just started showing up to his tennis matches, his tournament tennis matches with his Glock in his hand, and told whoever he was playing that if he lost the tennis match, he was going to, yeah, you can infer there. I'm not going to say it because I want this video to be pushed a little bit, but he told them that, so he would just be playing tennis with a Glock in one hand and his tennis racket in the other. And that was satirical for a while. It was kind of a funny idea for me to like pressure someone morally into this, to like letting him win this competition. Obviously later on there's some trauma that occurs there with Mario and I believe James and Candeza whenever Eric Clipperton shows up at the Infield Tennis Academy. That gets pretty graphic. This book does not skirt away from graphic content by any means. There is some very, very graphic content, I would say, and there's some stuff that's just like ingrained in my head that are just images that I don't particularly want to have, but the book told very well and made me feel things, and that was one of them. Eric Clipperton overall was a really interestingly written character, though. I would say I thought it was funny at first, at times it was dark, and then obviously the ending was not funny in the slightest. We had Lucian, who was this shop owner who owned like a video store with his brother, I want to say. And then we had the AFR, the wheelchair assassins. They showed up looking for what I assume was the Samizdat. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I have only read this book. I haven't listened to anyone say that. So Samizdat is how it seems like it would be said, but we'll see. The Samizdat is the film that James and Candeza made, I believe. And they're looking for that in this video store, and they just like start brutally murdering Lucian and his brother. Like I don't remember exactly how they killed his brother. Maybe they shot him. I can't remember entirely, but I just remember they impale Lucian, which was it was just insane. Yeah, it seems like a lot of the content I'm talking about is just graphic content at this point, huh? Maybe that's the thing that sticks out a lot, because the next thing I have on my list, and this is skipping forward a bit, but we have this character named Linz, who is at the halfway house, and this is even more difficult stuff to talk about or read. I'm not really gonna go into detail, but he has his whole animal arc. He does things to animals, and those chapters were very rough for me to read. That always gets me a lot in books. I hate reading that type of stuff. And where I'm at now, which is just skipping forward even a bit more, he's kind of paying the price for it. or maybe he's not paying the price for it, but someone's gonna pay the price for it is all I'll say. Because the last chapter I read, he was being chased back to the halfway house, and Gately goes outside after they're moving the cars, and he already knows Linz has been using, because we know that Linz has been using. We have Linz's point of view, and Gately goes outside and he's being chased by these knucks, which I guess means, I don't entirely know what that means. Hopefully that's not a rude word. I don't think it is, but I'm gonna make sure before I say it in the video. He's being chased by them because he killed their dog, and he gets in this showdown. They have a knife and a gun, and Gately gets involved. Gately ends up getting cut in his calf, and then he gets shot in his shoulder, and he ends up like beating the dudes up. Pretty sure some of them died. It's literally where I left off. So I don't know what the recourse is from that, but I really hope that Gately doesn't have adverse consequences to that. I mean, I feel like he might. Like, I've been thinking about it because I read that this morning, and it's about 4 p.m. now, so I've had some time to like ruminate over it. There's a potential to build like some type of self-defense case there. They had a knife and a gun, and Gately was unarmed, but I really don't know how it's going to turn out. I've been really rooting for Gately. I think he's one of the more redeemable characters in the book, especially at the halfway house. I've been wanting him to kind of straighten out his life. He's been doing well from what we've read thus far, so I'm really hoping this doesn't just send him down the wrong course once again, but I guess we'll see. I have a couple hundred pages left. I'm gonna try to pick up the pace a little bit and finish the book up so I can put this video together. I'm definitely like skipping over a lot of things, but these are the things that stood out to me. And mostly it seems like it was just graphic stuff and then understanding some other parts of the story. But I would say I'm really enjoying this book. I don't necessarily want it to be over. I definitely feel like in most books I have the urge to like push through to get to the end. I don't have a feeling the end of this book is going to be like necessarily as much of a traditional end as a lot of other novels would be. So I don't think that maybe that's part of the reason why I'm not willing to push so much, but either way, I am just enjoying my time with it. So if it's a while before I record another update, I apologize, but I'm just going to continue picking away at it, and I'll let you guys know what I think as I do. So, peace. All right, it's been a minute, but I am back. We have read a lot more of Infinite Jest. I am on page 934, so I have just about 50 pages left in the book, which is really exciting. And yeah, let's go over some of the things that happened since we left off. As before, I also just gonna have some various things I wrote down throughout the reading of this, and I'm just gonna go over them one by one. And yeah, maybe a little bit sporadic, we may skip over some things, this type of thing, but either way, hey there Oslo, hey there, we're just gonna go over what I thought from what I've read thus far. So the first thing I had written down was that the scene where the AFR actually captures the MIT station worker who's like sitting on a hill in a park is just phenomenal. They had like a van at the top of the hill and then a van at the bottom of the hill. They had basically a person in a wheelchair come out of the top van and has like basically a cow catcher, which is what you see on like a train on the front of his wheelchair, and he goes down the hill and he hits the station worker because they're trying to figure out about Joella's whereabouts, so that they're gonna interrogate him. So they capture him by basically sending the guy down the hill with the cow catcher and just pushing him into the other van at the bottom of the hill, which I just thought was really funny and just a very clever and absurd thing that has been so fruitful. There's been so many of those examples in this book that I really enjoyed, and that was just one that I feel like I should highlight because it definitely made me laugh when I was reading it. And I thought it was just very creative overall. I also wrote down that I was rooting for Joella and Gately, which I definitely am. Gately has become one of my favorite characters in this book, and I really like Joella too. I'm sorry, I think it's Joella. I don't entirely know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm going to call her Joella. So I really like both those characters. I think they're very fun to follow. And I also wrote down that I was rooting against Linz. I do not like Linz. That dude is despicable. I am hoping that he has some type of punishment for what all he's done in this book, as well as what he did to Gately, because he's basically screwing Gately over in some ways from their previous interaction with the Quebecs. So I'm rooting for them, rooting against Linz. This is just a random thought that I wrote down as well, but I wrote Fantids to Wallace as monomania to Melville, which I think is true. If you've read Moby Dick, Melville just constantly loves using the word monomania and monomaniac when referring to Captain Ahab, and I feel like Wallace does that with Fantids here, or Fantids. I don't entirely know how you pronounce that. That word is just pretty prevalent throughout the book, and a funny little thought I had. And then I wrote down that we had the AFR experiment, because the AFR actually finds the samizdat, and they do an experiment with an orthopedic saw. And I won't get into the details of that experiment, but that was just insane. There are so many things that have just made my skin crawl from having to think about some of the images in this book. There are some very gruesome points throughout the entirety of this book. I wrote down I thought Marith was going to fully infiltrate the Innet house, but it seems like he wasn't. I'm further on in the book, and he's just left. He just basically got information that there was someone there that was veiled, and so that's the information he got. But he didn't actually stay. I was kind of expecting him to stay and interact with Joelle and other people in the Innet recovery house, but he didn't do that. I wrote down that my highlight conversations, I think, in this book, or some of my favorite chapters have actually been the conversations between Hal and his brothers. There was one that I read more recently where he has a conversation with Mario, but there's one earlier in the book where he has a phone call with Oren, and I just feel like both times, it's like there's two dialogues or two people talking, and they're talking about their own things, and it seems like they're both just talking at each other, but then they randomly just connect or respond to the other person, and I don't know, they're actually really fun to read, kind of stream of consciousness like, but they're very philosophical. There's some touching points to them. I don't know. I really like those conversations. Those have been some of my favorite chapters so far in this book, I would say. I also noted that Marith's POV was probably my least favorite, and I think that's probably still true. I'm not really particularly rooting for him. I am in some way. I understand that he has a thing with his wife, and I understand what he's doing, but I definitely lean more towards the POVs of Gately and Hal, which I think are kind of our main POVs, those three. And then I wrote that Hal and Pimulus have to get sober, which is a result of the urine test that Pimulus managed to delay for 30 days. And that has been having a big impact on Hal thus far, especially where I'm at right now in the book. And I'm really curious to see how that turns out. There was also like a slight reference that I picked up on between potential relationship type thing between Oren and the moms, which I thought was a little odd and hasn't been mentioned anywhere in the book. If you guys know anything about the part that I'm referencing, I would love to hear about it. But I mean, we also have the obvious relation with the moms and Wayne, which is just bizarre, I guess. It's also probably not legal the more I think about it. Yeah, that's rough. Well, I don't necessarily know that anything is happening. He was just like dressed up in tennis pads or something like that. It was just something weird that Pimulus walked in on. Speaking of John Wayne and Pimulus, John Wayne also took he got into Pimulus's drawings in his stash, and then ended up going on the intercom like extremely high and like just ranting and insulting everyone at the academy, which was pretty funny, I guess. But it seems like Pimulus has definitely taken the brunt of the blame for that, and he was given like the option, he's like to finish the semester or he can like leave and be expelled. So I'm really hoping that things turn out for Pimulus, because I do like him as well, as I do most people at the academy, I would say in general. I'm impartial towards certain people like Charles Tavis. I'm impartial to him, but a lot of people at like especially the students at the academy I like. We also had like Gately's been in the hospital this entire time, obviously, and we've had all these people just coming in and like ranting to him. Like we had what was his name, Tiny, and a couple other people like Day, I think, came in, and they just come in and just rant to him, and just it's so funny because he's like, well, they never talked to me this much whenever I could actually respond, but now that I can't actually respond, they're all just ranting at me. And I think that's so true. I feel like a lot of quieter people have experienced situations where people just talk at you, or maybe not even just quieter people, but I think a lot of people have just experienced situations where people just talk at you, and it seems like they don't even really care if you respond or not. And this is like prime example of that, because he literally can't talk back, but everyone's coming in and just telling them their whole life story at this point. We also have Gately's weird visions that are going on. Like he has like the Wraith, he had like this vision with Joelle, he thinks someone's outside the door who's like coming to, I think, like arrest him for what he did, which I still can't tell if that's real or not. I really can't tell when it comes to Gately's POV what is real and what isn't at this point. The Wraith was incredibly odd, and it seemed like it may have been alluding to the fact that the Wraith was the Mad Stork, based on some of the similarities between what we know of his life and of the Wraith's life. The Wraith was also just weird as could be in general, like with the idea that he's like at a super fast time speed, so he has to like really concentrate and stay still so that Gately can see him. I thought that was just pretty funny and clever. And then lastly, I think the only other thing I really had down was that I think Hal is going through it. He seems to be losing grips on reality a little bit. He's now like laying in the film room just watching the Mad Stork's old films, because he has, I think it's a combination of getting sober, but also what Pimulus said to him, that like he doesn't know if he could ever actually get sober or like stay sober forever. And I think Hal is just really going through it. Obviously at the start of the book originally we had this weird scene where Hal is like in a college entrance interview and he's like not talking at all. So I think we're going to see him move more towards that, but I'm really hoping that things turn out well for Hal, but I have a feeling they will not. It's a Sunday and that's about all I wanted to cover. So I'm gonna try to, I think my Kindle, I've been reading this on my Kindle as well. It says I have about 2 hours left in the book. So I'm gonna try to knock out all that reading today and just finish up this book. So I will see you guys after that. Well, we're back where it all started at this point now, back in New York. So I finished the book maybe a week or two ago, and I kind of wanted to give myself some time to ruminate over the ending and kind of figure out exactly how I felt about it. I wanted to make very generous claims right away, and I felt like I should probably let them breathe a little bit and make sure that those were how I really feel. And I can confirm that they are pretty close to how I really feel. As stereotypical as it is to say, I think that I have to say that this is probably the best book I've ever read. In terms of pushing the media or the idea of a book forward, it's comparable to other, like the only thing that I've read similarly, which I've mentioned previously, is Moby Dick, and I think that this pushes the boundary even more and is just incredibly groundbreaking, I guess is the best way to put it. Going into the specifics of the actual ending though, I think that there's some things that I probably didn't fully understand, and I think that that lends itself to a good book. I don't think I should be able to understand the entire book and everything going on in one read, or it's really not that rewarding of a read. My interpretation of the ending seemed to be like we kind of had Gately coming out of his cycle, his addiction cycle. He was recovering from this illness that had hospitalized him, while he was like thinking back about all the stuff that he had done and all these crazy memories that he was like reliving in the hospital. But then at the same time, we have Hal slipping into that cycle. The beginning of the book actually takes place after the end of the book. So what we had read in the first couple chapters actually took place, I think, like months or so after the ending of this. So we know that Hal goes on to really be incapacitated by his addiction, or his lack thereof addiction, I guess would be the best way to put it, because he feels like he's never going to actually be complete again, even if he can get over his addiction. I think that it's really telling that we have both these characters kind of at different points in their life, and we've been drawing parallels and following both of them at the same time. And overall, I just thought like it was an incredibly ingenious depiction of addiction, not even just substance abuse, like also entertainment, also just like the idea that everyone has something they worship and everyone has something that is going to take their primary focus and that they're going to value more than other things. And it's just part of being human, and we have to learn how to like manage those things, I guess, is kind of what I took from it. I thought the book was great. I really didn't want to make the claim that it was my favorite book I've ever read, but unfortunately I think it deserves it. I think that it's just really hard to read something like that and then not appreciate all the genius that went into it. Now, I don't want this to come off as me like praising Wallace as a person. I know he had some issues that I've read into. I'm not by any means glorifying him, just the book itself. The book was phenomenal, and it really changed what I thought a book could do to me. So thank you for watching this video, and if you haven't, I would suggest reading Infinite Jest. Peace.